Hey guys! Today we'll be covering a 2019 miniseries called Dream Night. The episode opens up with a girl named In-young dozing off in her classroom. The other girls in the class rudely wake her up and make fun of her. However, In-young is an optimistic girl who sees everything positively. After her mother's death, she made her own shelter in an old bus trailer. While leaving the classroom, In-young trips, and 4 boys, JB, Mark, Jackson, and Youngjae, help her up. After she leaves, the boys who appear to have magical powers cast a spell on the bullies. Later, a popular music band GOT7, which consists of the members Junior, Bam Bam, and Yujeom, arrives at the school. They are immediately surrounded by fans, and In-young is one of them. It turns out that she is a big fan of Junior, and as she tries to approach him, she is pushed by the crowd, causing her to fall onto Junior. That night, In-young searches the internet and finds several people hating on her for hurting Junior. Upset, she goes to sleep. The next morning, she finds JB and his friends sleeping next to her. Taken aback, she freaks out and starts screaming. Seeing this, the boys become confused and mention that it isn't the first time they've slept next to her. Jackson reveals that In-young has even kissed JB before, but the latter quickly covers his mouth and tells In-young to go to school. On her way to school, In-young ponders if she knows the boys. Meanwhile, a group of girls who are Junior's fans chase her for hurting him earlier. In-young runs, but just when a bike is approaching her, she trips in the middle of the street. Fortunately, JB, Mark, Jackson, and Youngjae arrive and save In-young from getting run over. At school, In-young is stopped by a group of mean girls led by Jenny, who make fun of her for falling on Junior and hurting him. Meanwhile, JB and his friends arrive and tell the girls to mind their own business. Also, JB says that Jenny has the greatest inferiority complex in the world. In a flashback, we see a young Jenny being jealous of In-young, who always outshines her. Meanwhile, the group of mean girls angrily storm away, and the 4 boys celebrate their small victory. Later, the same group of girls from earlier pour a bucket of water over In-young while she's in the restroom. However, they are soon confronted by JB and the boys, who scold them for troubling In-young. One thing leads to another, and the 2 groups get into a fight. When the girls start gaining the upper hand, the boys use their magical powers to stop them. With Jackson's control over fire, Youngjae's control over wind, and Mark's ability to make people love one another, they collectively defeat the girls. However, JB refrains from using his ability to freeze anything, considering that the girls are just kids. That night, JB and the boys take the mean girls to In-young and ask them to apologize to her. Obliging, the girls apologize, and a kind In-young forgives them. Afterwards, she thanks the boys and tells them to go home. Surprisingly, the boys head inside her trailer, saying it's their home. As In-young refuses to let them in, she suddenly gets a call from her mother's friend, who asks her to allow her son to live with her for a few days. Confused, In-young tries to explain her situation, but the woman hangs up. As a result, she mistakenly assumes JB to be the caller's son and lets the group stay for the night outside her trailer. The next morning, the boys find that In-young is broke and doesn't have food at her home. So, they go outside a shopping mall and dance in front of the crowd, while In-young collects money from the onlookers. Later, they go grocery shopping with that money. Back in In-young's trailer, the boys tell her to rest while they cook and clean. Meanwhile, Youngjae plays around with her phone and receives a text from the son of In-young's mom's friend, notifying her that he's actually not coming because he met someone. Surprisingly, instead of showing In-young the text, he deletes it. Later, Mark and Jackson mistakenly break In-young's camcorder. Although the boys insist they can fix it, In-young gets upset and cries. She kicks the boys out of her trailer and locks the door, despite them begging for a chance to explain. A few moments later, In-young opens the door, throws water on the boys, and shuts the door again. Mysteriously, the boys, now drenched in water, vanish. Later, inside her trailer, In-young is surprised to find her 4 dolls soaked in her backpack. It turns out that the dolls have always been with her through thick and thin. The next morning, she hangs the dolls in the sun. Surprisingly, as soon as the dolls dry out, the boys emerge from the doll forms. In the next scene, Junior runs into In-young at the school's gym. She apologizes to him for the previous incident, and he says it's okay because it was unintentional. As the 2 of them are in the same age group and from the same grade, he asks her to not be formal. Since In-young is cleaning the gym, Junior decides to help her. However, when they are carrying heavy gym equipment, he hears some fans screaming his name and quickly runs away. Unfortunately, in the process, he drops the heavy equipment, which lands on In-young's foot and fractures it. Later, In-young tries to make her way down the stairs with a cast on her foot and a crutch. As expected, she loses her balance, but luckily ends up falling into JB's arms. JB and the boys then carry her back to the trailer and promise to look after her. They also explain that they have left her camcorder at a shop to be repaired. With this, In-young forgives the boys and decides to let them live with her until her leg heals. That evening, Jackson, Mark, and Youngjae go for a walk, leaving JB behind with In-young. Once alone, the 2 begin to bond. When In-young mentions that she wants to go inside the trailer, JB helps her up. However, he slips and In-young ends up falling on top of him, landing face to face. As they glance at each other, the remaining 3 boys return and tease them. Embarrassed, JB and In-young say nothing happened between them. The next day at school, In-young learns about a dance competition where the winner gets to perform with GOT7. Since none of her classmates are ready to dance with her, JB and the boys decide to join her. Later in the playground, In-young gets upset about her situation. Turns out that she has a disorder named myasthenia gravis, in which her muscles will gradually weaken, starting with her legs, and may spread to her whole body. It's the reason why she stumbles often. Meanwhile, she notices the words "bippity boppity boo" written on her cast, and finds out it's from JB. Shortly after, he arrives, and In-young immediately asks how he knows about the words, as her mother used to mention it quite often. JB simply smiles and asks her to let him help her. In a flashback, we see In-young facing hardships after her mother's death. She is always depressed and sad, but through everything, her 4 dolls remain with her. One day when she cries, her tears fall onto her JB doll. That's when the 4 of them came into her world in order to protect her. In the present, In-young is now free from her leg cast and rehearses with the boys for the dance competition. Since she is inflexible in her moves, JB makes her work out on her legs, saying a strong lower body is fundamental to dancing. Later at school, the GOT7 band is filming promos. When the producer asks about their friends, Junior sees In-young passing by and claims that she's his friend, despite the previous incident. When In-young mentions that she's going to dance in his band's song during the competition, Junior gets excited and tries to show some of his moves. Just then, JB steps in and mentions that Junior is doing the step incorrectly. Later, the producer takes Junior for class footage, but he doesn't want to do it. Seeing this, In-young takes him away and they hide in another classroom. Inside, the 2 connect. Once the coast is clear, they sneak out of the room only to be stopped by JB, who has been looking for In-young the entire time. When Junior puts his arm around In-young and tries to lead her in a different direction, JB gets mad and uses his power to freeze him. He then pulls In-young's hand and takes her with him. Once JB and In-young get away, Junior is unfrozen and realizes that JB is not human. Later, Junior tells Bam Bam and Yujiom that JB is not human. Surprisingly, the 3 of them are calm, and they soon realize that JB and his friends are dolls. So they decide to find out what powers they possess and look for their doll forms. In the next scene, In-young is practicing some dance moves with JB by her side. Just then, Junior arrives and tries to be friendly with In-young. However, JB pulls her hand and takes her away. As In-young leaves, Junior notices that the dolls aren't hanging on her backpack. Realizing that she might have them at home, Junior offers to walk her home after school, to which she agrees, unaware of his real intentions. After school, Bam Bam and Yujiom approach Jackson, Mark, and Young Jae to put their plans in motion. Soon, they discover their powers. Elsewhere, JB joins Junior and In-young on their way to her home. After they reach the trailer, In-young asks Junior to stay outside so that she can clean the mess in her room. When she goes inside, the Young Jae doll falls to the ground and Junior picks it up. JB asks him to give it back, but Junior refuses. Shortly after, when In-young finishes tidying up and comes outside, the 2 boys are nowhere to be seen. In the next scene, JB and the group find out that Junior, Bam Bam, and Yujiom used to be guardians, but they are humans now. Junior tells them that they were born from tears of despair, and they will die from tears of happiness. This means that if In-young cries with joy, they will all disappear. Junior also reveals that they can remain in their human forms if they betray In-young and let her die. In this way, someone has to die, whether it be them or In-young. Hearing this, JB's friends immediately distance themselves from JB, as they know that he loves In-young and can't betray her. In a flashback, Junior and his friends are guardians of a woman who jumps off a bridge and dies before she can be saved. Back in the present, JB confronts his friends, but it appears they have already made up their minds. They are desperate to become humans, even if it costs In-young's life. Hearing this, JB becomes enraged and starts fighting with his friends. Later, when the boys return home with bruises and cuts all over their faces, In-young worries for them. In another flashback, we see In-young naming her dolls and kissing her favorite one, JB. In the present, In-young talks to the dolls and says she hasn't felt lonely ever since JB and the boys entered her life. Although she is unaware, the boys can hear her entire conversation as their doll forms. The next morning, JB begs his friends to protect In-young since they are her guardians. He fears losing her and explains that they are in this world only because of her. A flashback then reveals that Junior loved a woman he guarded, but she loved someone else. So he decided not to protect her. When the woman's lover died, she also took her life in despair, causing Junior and his friends to turn into humans without any powers. Back in the present, Mark, Young Jae, and Jackson recall all the good memories with In-young and decide to join JB to protect her. However, when they go upstairs with JB to meet In-young, Junior arrives before them and asks her out on a date. Unfortunately, she happily agrees and leaves with him, ignoring the 4 guardians. When In-young arrives home, JB asks her if she's happy with Junior, but strangely, she doesn't answer him. Later, as In-young is cleaning her room, she finds detailed plans written by JB for her exercise and dance. As a result, she starts getting flashbacks about how JB has helped her through everything. Suddenly, she sees a concert ticket and realizes that JB must be waiting for her. So, she hurries to the concert to meet him. However, when she arrives, the concert is already over and JB is nowhere to be found. Upset, she sits on the stairs and starts crying. Meanwhile, the star performer of the concert, Chansung, comes out and asks her why she's upset. She quickly tells him about JB, and the latter summons his fans for help. He tells them that In-young is looking for someone and that they need to find him. As In-young speaks up and describes JB, the latter suddenly emerges from the crowd. Seeing him, In-young smiles and apologizes for being late. However, as the two are talking, she suddenly faints in JB's arms, worrying him. In the next scene, JB waits outside the doctor's office anxiously. Shortly after, In-young comes out and says she's fine. However, in reality, the doctor revealed that her health is getting worse and that her whole body might soon become stiff. A devastated In-young cries, thinking she has to let go of JB after just realizing her feelings for him. The following day, the group practices hard for the competition taking place the next day. By now, In-young has improved immensely and is able to keep up with the boys. After the practice, JB and In-young go out on a date and spend a lovely day together. Later that night, when they arrive at the trailer, Mark, Jackson, and Youngjae have set up a special surprise for In-young. Since it is the last day before the dance competition, they decide to celebrate. On the day of the competition, Junior stops by In-young's trailer and tells her that the boys are not humans, but stuffed dolls, who are her guardians. Hearing this, In-young is taken aback, and instead of going to the competition, she sits alone and considers what to do next. Elsewhere, the dance competition has already started, but In-young hasn't arrived yet. Because of this, JB and the boys start to get worried, so JB goes to the trailer to find In-young, but she isn't there. Unable to find her anywhere, he returns to the competition. Soon, In-young arrives and apologizes for being late. Before getting ready for the performance, she hugs JB and says that she loves him, no matter who he is. Afterwards, In-young and the boys give their best and win the competition. They also perform on the stage alongside the GOT7 boys. At the end of their performance, In-young finally sheds a tear of happiness. The scene then switches to JB handing off the camcorder to Junior and asking him to take care of In-young. Surprisingly, Junior praises JB and his friends for being such great guardians. Later, a delighted In-young tells her guardians that she cherishes them and she has never been this happy in her life. Hearing this, Youngjae, Mark, and Jackson give her a group hug and disappear, since In-young shed tears of happiness after winning the competition. Upset, In-young starts crying and begs JB not to leave her. However, he can only kiss her one last time before eventually fading away. In-young is devastated and bursts into tears. Meanwhile, Junior arrives and tries to comfort her. He gives her the camcorder and a note left behind by JB. In-young reads the note, in which JB says that he was always happy to be by her side throughout all her good and bad moments. He also mentions that he'll always love her. Later that night, In-young looks at the sky and says goodbye to her guardians. Just then, the dolls from her backpack float up to the sky and become bright stars. The scene then cuts to a year later, where In-young and Junior are happy together and plan to go for dinner. The series ends when In-young stumbles and a guy approaches her and gives her a hand. Her expression quickly changes when she notices that the person has the same sneakers as JB.